I must say I'm absolutely delighted to be here because this is where I won the prize for Andal, the book that I'm talking about. And it was so nice to know that it was appreciated because I often did 3 translations of the same poem, but we'll talk about that later. Here I just want to, before we begin, may I ask you to come a little forward, if you don't mind? Because, you know, it's easier, it's more intimate. Andal sometimes seems to whisper to us her secret words. So Andal is a 9th century Alvar poet. Alvars who worshipped Vishnu. She was a foundling. Her father is known as Priya Alvar, the elder Alvar, or Vishnu Chittar, who had Vishnu on his consciousness. He was a garland maker in a temple, and one day he found this girl lying under a tulsi bush. She grows up in an atmosphere of devout Vaishnava bhakti, but then one day there is a story of transgression. She wears the garland meant for the god. That is a completely wrong thing to do. You want him supposed to smell the flowers, and she wears it. Her father finds out and scolds her, but in a dream, the god comes to her, Vishnu himself, and says, "This girl is going to be my bride, bring her to me." So she is taken to the temple in a palanquin, Sri Rangam temple, and there she disappears in a flash of light. This is when she was 16. Her first book, Tirupave, Path to Krishna, she wrote when she was just 13. And the erotic and sacred Nachar Tirumuri, the sacred songs of the lady, she wrote when she was 15. So we must keep in mind all the time that when we're reading Andal, when we're hearing Andal, that this is a young girl with her hormones bubbling, in her. She's also viewed as a goddess now, as Bhudevi, the earth goddess, consort of Vishnu. And her name, Gode, or Goda in the Telugu, it means to plait, because she was also plaiting garlands, and she wanted to plait herself to the Lord. But when she transited centuries later to being called, she was called Andal, she who possesses the Lord. And I will call her Andal because she certainly possesses me. She's one of those figures you can't let go of. And she's a living mystic poet. She's a teen icon, represents fertility and sexuality. Her songs, the Tirupave, and one song from the second composition are sung even today. But before we go into Andal, I'd just like you to think for a moment. When you read her, when you hear her words, how would it be received today if a 15-year-old girl posted erotic poetry about a divine love on social media? Would she be trolled? Would we say, she deserves it? Or would we actually think, she's speaking of a tremendous, unimaginable love? Just keep this in mind in today's society. Think of the social and political and spiritual realities we're with today. So let's go into Andal's work, the first one. This Tirupave is a devotional, congregational hymn. And here she presents herself as, she is here the popular girl goddess who is absolutely devoted to Krishna. She is adoring. She imagines herself and her girlfriends as gopi girls of Krishna. And she imagines, this is Andal's imagination, she imagines that her little town has been transformed into Krishna's town. And she tries to go around waking up everyone to Vaishnava Bhakti. She says, "Bejeweled gopi girls, each a jewel, enhance your sparkle by bathing in his luminescence, full as the moon against indigo skies. Lance bright his eyes, bright his lance that glides through fear. Come, bathe in the river of devotion of the lion cub, Krishna, Yashoda's joy, our single star. His home is here, where we gather. The time is now, this Marhari month. Come, pledge yourself to radiance. She writes, of course, in classical Tamil, and this song is one of ascension. In song, she ascends to the heavens. At 13, she tries to wake up the gods to fulfill their duties, that is, to be devoted, to love the little gopi girls. But her aim is not material, but spiritual, because she says, at the end, Krishna, accept our devotion. No, we come not for jewels, but only this. Through unfolding centuries, we seek to serve you. If our intent is different, remake us in your light heart's tease. That is the Tirupavai, the popular song, sung every month by women mainly in India today. Then Andal turns 15, and we're jolted by this composition. It's rarely translated because these are songs of rapture and rupture, and they're erotic and sacred. They don't allow themselves to be sanitized, so they are silenced. And here she says, anguish floods my body and will sweep it away. Unlike the land Govardhana's Lord rescued, he yanked the mountain from earth's bosom to hold as an umbrella over devotees. Yet for me, not a glance. If I see Krishna, thief who mauled me, I'll maul my breasts. I'll uproot their round mounds from my body, uproot my love, and fling it at him. If he won't caress me, what use is this howling tenderness? Now, what's happened to the 13-year-old, the sweet little 13-year-old, to make her at 15 spew such fury at a god? Her hagiography doesn't provide a clue. I wrote a story about her to help me understand, but basically, she's not an ordinary girl. Translating Andal, I did find I was in the presence of a phenomenal intelligence, and she is just about the finest poet I've ever read. And what she does is she never leaves any loose threads. She is a woman who obeys her own calling. Her poetry will be divine and carnal. And she doesn't accept any rules except those of poetry. She's not a proto-feminist. I think that's a regressive appropriation. And I don't think she was lonely. I don't think she was depressed. Not at all. She was in Viraha Tapam, which is a kind of burning fire of separation, And it is the separation from cosmic harmonies, from the beloved, really. She's like lightning over water. She's like crystal burning. She's intense. And her world is also intense and enchanted. So she doesn't need any guidelines to follow her path. What she does is, she starts writing, and this is another Andal we see here. She writes what is called her autobiography, which is why my book is called The Autobiography of a Goddess. And here Andal speaks of a love so vast, it overruns every terrain, breaches every boundary, crosses every line. It's outrageous, it's intense, it's sundering. And this Andal's love is a spiral of sexual love and spiritual anguish. And her bhakti courses like a tongue of flames, like a river of lava, and it burns all in its wake, including herself. But her imagination is grand and her spirituality swallows the heavens. And now I'd like you to think about translation in two ways. The first, as a piece of embroidery. What we see, what we read is the final product, the neat picture. What we do is we flip it over. When you flip it over, you see all the connections, all the threads running up and down. And this is what I did with Andal. I followed every emotional thread of color. I followed every suggestion that she'd made, every kind of stitch. And therefore, I found that I could read her in a different way. And she really made my synapses sparkle. The other way of thinking of translation, especially of mystic poetry, I think, is as diving. You dive very deep. You dive so deep that your I in you gets replaced, and it's bubbled out, and it's kind of filled with her voice. And so when you sing, it's your voice and hers mingling. And I knew I was translating the divine poet, the poet, not the little girl, lonely little girl, not the goddess. And I had to intuit what she means. And this is because, Sangam poetry, which she largely followed, Sangam is 2 BCE to 2 CE. She followed this ancient poetic tradition largely. That means, which says, they give you the literal meaning, and then you as a reader, you price out the hidden meaning and the inset meaning. What it did for me means I could intuit, I could make connections which are not there. That was fabulous, and I think I'm the only translator, yes, I'm the only translator who's used these 3 levels of this ancient language to get to her. And in one song, I interpreted that she is menstruating because I made the connections. Now, of course, this caused a lot of criticism from orthodox male scholars, but I think it has helped other people in the field discover this aspect of her. Whether they give credit to me or not, it's not the matter. It's that you see her present herself as a young woman. And how do I know this? Let me first read the verse. Look, rubies beat the grove's wet emerald as ladybirds return, heralding the monsoon. As that heralds the beloved's return. As my blood beats, herald, I'm a newly woman seeking his caress. He churned the star-drenched ocean to make it yield its jewel shri. I yielded all when he churned me. What happens is, because of Sangam poetics, in the monsoon is a time when the men come back from warfare, so it's a time for lovemaking. Second, the ladybugs, which spatter on the ground, not only visually remind you of blood, but they herald the season of fertility. So Andal is saying here, you know what? I'm now a woman. Come, take me. And she wants to wed the Lord, Vishnu, Krishna, not in the spirit like the other mystics did, but in the flesh. And that is what is so touching about her. And yet at the same time, she has this belief that she could do it because her love is so intense. It's again very young. So what does she do? She decides to sing the Lord of the universe into submission. First, she's methodical. She calls to the god of love, Kama. Kama, my body blazes with desire. Shoot me to him who holds the discus hissing flame. I shall serve him, constant as a shadow. Does Kama heed her call? No. So Andal turns from petitioning to pleading. She pleads with Krishna like the gopis of Mathura did. She says, child, Lord, tease, return our clothes, please. She commands the flowers that grow all around her. She says, trap him in your scented lace. She pays tribute to her own beauty to make herself more interesting and exciting, really. She says she's long-eyed, with glossy, fragrant hair, with a fine forehead, with breasts like hills. Or she just says she's excellent. Now, yet, this Andal is heartbreak territory, really heartbreak territory. As her body and her soul rage with yearning, she wonders, did he create such enchantment only to discard it? Now, Andal implores Vishnu's conch. Vishnu has a conch. It's one of his attributes. You see, Vishnu puts the conch to his lips, which Andal wants to drink from. So it makes her jealous and curious, the conch. So she says, Kalpuram naramo, Kamalappu naramo, camphor flame, or budding lotuses. What is the scent of his sacred breath? White conch whirled from the ocean of time, like you are long to sip from Madhavan's coral lips. Fortunate one, admit our bond and share him with me. But does the conch hear her? No. So Andal's ache grows, and with it her anger, and we enter now the passionate, bleeding heart of bhakti. This is not for the faint-hearted, Andal calls to Vishnu in his fiercest avatar as Narasimha, the man-lion. She wants the claws of the sacred to rip and rend her every cell and so heal her entire being. Whatever the cost of this transformation, she wants him there. So she says, dark clouds, you enlarge in anger, growl and roll across the skies, rending it open with lightning bolts. You tear flowers, spill honey, petals clot like blood on earth. Go to the fierce lord who plunged his claws in Hiranya, roaring and mane-tossing as his bloody paws ripped insides out. Go, clouds, go tell him, I've grown thin with longing. Bangles slip from my wrist. He must heal me with his touch. From these very hands I seek fondling. Gather my swollen ripeness in as spilling nectar, my body's blood flower bursts. The monsoon comes and the monsoon goes and there's no response. As I said, Andal isn't for the faint-hearted. She's passionate. She's transformational. She beseeches people to fan her with the silken pitambar that covers Krishna's thighs. She wants to soak in his scent. She wants to have the dewy tulsi garland that he wears to be rubbed on her chest. Sorry. And Andal demands that the liquid from Krishna's mouth be rubbed all over her body to revive her. She says, bring me his mouth's nectar, bring much, baste me with it, make haste. Instead of his lips' ecstasy, pour this from his mouth to mine, so I might stay alive. Now let's remember that in bhakti poetry, breasts are considered containers of pleasure, of course, but they're also paramabhogam, the piety of intoxication. So if Krishna still does not respond, Andal threatens to do more than rip out her breasts. What could this be? She will discard devotion. Discard it. She says, my love-swollen breasts cry for Krishna's grasp. My only wish is to serve him in every pleasing way. If he rejects me again and again and again and again, let me pass. Let me pass into oblivion's arms and find my peace there. I'm ready. This one time, for all my love, let him end his play. This one time, let him have the courage to face me, just once. My final prayer is this: accept or release me for all time to come. For all time. If he doesn't turn now, let there be no returning. Answer, Krishna, or let it end now. Now, how human that sounds, how final. But in the very last hymn, it said that Andal does find her Lord as indwelling, antaryami, in her heart, in the pulse of her breath, blood, and tread, and that she trances in bliss. Yet there's one song from the Nachar Tirumurai, the sacred songs of the lady, that is sung in every Sri Vaishnava wedding, even today, where every bride is imagined as Andal and every groom as Narayana Vishnu. She says, Kana Kanden, Thori, I dreamt this dream, my friend, she says, and recounts this dream with documentary realism. A ring of Brahmins chant mantras, each word ringing. They position dharva grass around kindle flames that soar. All is ready. Then my love, stronger than a raging elephant, my hand in his, revolves us in 7 steps, Saptapadi, circling the sacred fire's million eyes. We are one. This is a dream I dreamt, my friend. We are one, we are one, we are one. That is Andal, very briefly. But you know, the thing is that when you are working on Andal, working on any translation, and when you are making leaps, when you're intuiting, you must have all your research done thoroughly. It's a responsibility you must do. So I did do research. I worked on the difficult classical Tamil no longer spoken with possibly the finest scholar we have living today on ancient Sangam poetics, Dr. Raghuraman in Chennai, to ask him, look, this word, can it be interpreted this way? Are these interpretations right? Could it be, whenever I had a doubt? And he was magnificent. What was also nice is that he agreed with my interpretations all through. And there was theology. I mean, in most, when you're translating sacred verse, what happens is you get theology, you get a lot of that coming in and very little of the aesthetics. I wanted to push in the aesthetics and damp down the theology. But there was that, there was philosophy. So I traveled to Sri Rangam, to the foremost scholar there, Dr. Prema Nandakumar. And we had long discussions and it helped me. And there's also travel. I mean, there's so many things about this Andal. In one poem, in the poem of the wedding, she mentions the god wears slippers. Now, why is that so important? Unless other people around are not wearing slippers, then he is someone special. He wears the slippers. So I started doing the research on how they dressed. No saris. All they wore, men and women, was a little thigh-high wrap of cloth around their waists. The women would paint their breasts with red kumkum powder. Not saffron, not sandalwood, but just smear this kumkum powder. Because you have her say, I want to smear the red on my breast on you. So it's this red kumkum she's smearing. And also, you have to study, the flora and the fauna. I couldn't hear her in the temples. It was very noisy, so I went off into a nature reserve, very close to the place where she was found. And there, among those hills, you could hear the elephants trumpeting. You heard the monkeys. You heard the birds. It was like going back in time. So it helped me recreate her verse. And of course, I studied the fruits and flowers. For instance, she says something about wood apple. She says, I'm like a wood apple eaten by a worm. Now, what is so special about the wood apple? The point is, the wood apple looks full, even when it's entirely devoured by the worm inside. So she's saying Krishna has devoured me in every way. I'm spiritually in anguish and physically drained. These are the kind of, there was so much research, it's a separate story, as it were. But now let's move on to Sharanya's reading, which will be followed by her take on her research. Recordings 1 and 2, please.
And I must begin with a note of apology. I had really wanted to be with you at the Hyderabad Literary Festival, and I'm so grateful to the organizers who extended the invitation to me and then also allowed me to participate in this manner. And I'm grateful, of course, to the technology that allows us to do this today, and to my lovely co-panelist Priya, who graciously accepted the change in what we had originally discussed. I will be reading some excerpts from my novel, The Poem of Jasmine Country, which is a fictionalization of one possible life that the poet Kaavya, who posthumously became known as Andal, could have had. And I'll speak a little later about how I historicized and humanized this character whom we know largely from her hagiography, but deeply from her poetry. I will begin with the prologue. It was not always there, and one day it was. My body was used to blood, its monthly spillage, but my nature was not. Its surge rendered my body a conch, keeper of a riptide. Desire, this new language, spun me on itself like a discus. At night, I walk as deep into the groves as I can without being sighted, my anklets unclasped and held in my fist. Metal protects against malevolence, especially of the unseen kind. I turn circles, unable to sleep because of the bird in my throat and the blood drumming in every place where my pulse can be felt. I pluck wild hibiscus and golden magnolia, its petals luminously white under starlight. I lay myself upon the red ochre earth and untangle my limbs and hair in grass and tender pussy. I seep into the earth, its touch and mine the same, and then I blossom. Maybe everywhere there are those like me, people who smolder sunlight but singe as easily as feathers. But I know of no one else who is fevered by a secret so large. Bolstered by the sleeping women of my family, I wake up drenched in sweat and tears. The night is as dark and still as a vessel of unstirred indigo. I sit up, still trembling, and crouch over to unfasten my silver-belled anklets, then carefully raise myself from the floor. I adjust my loosely draped sari over my body and slip from the boundaries of home. And then I run, past the well with its dismemberments of moonlight, past the cowshed where no creature betrays me, and then beyond, burning into the grove where I came from, into the grove where the parrots know not to mimic the sounds of my ecstasy, and the undergrowth will not keep the shape of my trespass. And my body, this roaring, returns to and becomes earth and fire and floods lush and flowers. This young woman, Kobe, begins to undertake a vow, the power moon, with the sincere faith that it will bring her the beloved. And at the same time that she begins this vow, she also begins to write. And so this is the section on which, on the very first night of the month of March, having commenced her vow in the early morning of the same day, she begins to write what becomes the Tirupa. On the night that follows, the first night of March, the planets Supreme and Guru linger in the night sky, along with that gravid moon that had watched me walk from my well to the wide embrace of the lake that morning. I watched them glimmering in the early darkness, just as I am. The afterglow of having commenced my vow radiates through me. I am alone at the back of the house, beyond the kitchen, near the cowshed from which come occasional sounds of lowing, sleep descending on the animals after a day in the fields. Once again, the first night on which my eyes opened to the heavens above Vishnu Chitran's grove of Tulasi, palpitates my mood, like a raindrop in velvet. Tonight, under this arena of starlight, I take up my stylus and press it by the glow of a clay lantern into dry palmyra leaves. It is on this night that I dedicate myself to myself, to who I truly am, to what is invincible and without bondage of time that predates me, that will outlive me. I travel as I write, wayfaring on the hallucinogenic of words, the act of their scripting a form of magic that makes me forget all else than where they take me, which is also the place from where they came. And in this way I enter the landscape of iron, distant in space and time, where the people of the cows roam the forest and enter its rivers every day. I am among its girls, among its women, and more prosperous, for among us is the fierce prince, the lion cub who had been raised by Yashoda of the beauteous eyes. His own eyes are lotuses, his body dark like sapphire, his face Selenic in radiance, and we want from him a drum, the party, and we intend to keep our vow until he gives it to us. Through this sacred month of deepest winter, in which the genuine bluebell blooms, and the nights are long and vivid with wanting, we will ask him and ask again, and the world will rejoice as it listens to our asking. At the end of the leaf page I inscribe, without philosophy, the secret words that cannot be translated, that belong to the illiteral inner landscape, that by their repetition will fill, Lord, and proliferate. Amen. Kaavya keeps this back, and it fails her. And then she begins secret rites. She also begins at the same time to write what will become known as the Nachiyar. That afternoon, my father accompanies me to a place a few hours north of the towers of Madurai, where on the lower slopes of the densely picketed mountain of Tirumalurunjole is a temple to Vishnu in a form so exquisite that his name itself is beautiful. We cross the Silambu, an anklet of a stream, a tributary of the great gushing Valley, before we arrive at the foothills. Behind us follow 8 more carts, paid for with a part of my bridewell, but which I had promised to earn my keep for, somehow. Vishnu Chitran's face is in shadow through the child. At this temple, I offer the 100 pots of butter and 100 pots of rice the bullock carts have carried to tempt and persuade my Lord. And I stand before the beautiful one whose shoulders were made for my repose, with my nipples tender and stiff like jasmine buds, and promise him 100,000 pots more to come, if he will come to me, if he will only enter me and smear the saffron paste that I pressed to my breasts, imagining his own full hands. And so I begin anew on the day when the first harvest is celebrated. I begin again what failed the first time and hone my entreaty down to its sharpest and most selfish focus. If I pray for rain, it is for women. If I pray for the weight of utterance, it is for my swelling breasts to be held and fondled. If I pray for frolicking calm or lush yield, it is only for play and pleasure. With him, for me, for me, for me. These are secret rites, but they require of me exposure that will not keep them so. I'm accessing what came to me in dreams. I'm making them up as I go. Here I begin, here in the wild peacock-gilded tenements of Tirumalurunjole, where on the slopes far above me were elephants, abundant in the armory that the god Murugan made of the bower where his beloved, Valley, woman dark as a mango leaf, reigned and played. Here, where the war elephants roam untethered in times of peace, and down below are cool ponds filled with lotuses as lovely as my Narayana's eyes. I begin. I draw mandalas of rice powder before this distant shrine to Kamadeva, with short pillars overrun with creepers full of laughing flowers, and paint the inner walls of the sanctum with secret diagrams and syllables that run together and reveal all of my longing, when intoned. I draw his banner with its motifs of a shark, attendants carrying flying whisks, and his bowl of black sugar cane. I dip my fingers into a pot of wet flour and use them like fine brushes. In the groves of the hill, still broken and waiting for spring, I find thornless twigs and conflagrate them. On this I cook newly harvested grain and offer these to him along with raw paddy, sugar cane, and rice sweetened with jaggery. I pluck the dangerous datura flame, petals closed for it is a vespertine, and sweet scented marjoram leaves, and offer these at his feet. I am beseeching him directly. No mediators can speak for me any longer, For I have crossed into a spectral place. I have been denied what should come to me and come to all in the material world, and I want to transcend it. But I also want its deepest ecstasy. I do not know how else I will survive. I stand before him and unfurl my heart like a flag, and I sing. I will keep this vow until something breaks. The Queen of Jasmine Country is a work of historical fiction, and the challenge for me was to both historicize and humanize this character whom we know largely from hagiography. I was confidently able to place her story in the mid-9th century, which corresponds to accepted renderings of her tale, and which is backed up by two sources, one of which is an astrological detail which appears in her poems about the positions of Jupiter and Venus, Guru and Sukra. And there are records that show that this happened in the year 851 CE. This happens to also correspond with the regime, I should say rule, but perhaps it was a regime. The reign of the king Srimara Srivallabha of the Pandya dynasty in Madurai, who is an important character in the hagiography of Andal's father, Periyar, who appears in my novel by the name he knew himself by, Vishnu Chittan. Andal, of course, appears in my novel as the name she knew herself by, Kode. Who was Kode? Who was this teenager in a medieval small town in the 9th century, who unusually for her time was not married off in childhood like most children who are raised in a Brahmin household would be. That clue made me wonder, there was something wrong, basically. Something which prevented her from entering that system so simply. And this allowed me to complicate Andal's upbringing in ways which brought out a feminist ethos. I was able to give Andal a mother of uncertain origin and also have her be deeply influenced by women, especially Matadili, who is a cowherd and who leads a life which is liberated in so many ways and is unconventional even today. It was very important to me to bring in socio-political consciousness into this book in ways which were not ham-fisted and which did not seek to completely erase the voice that was clear in the poetry, a voice that was still very much of its time. So I thought about caste, I thought about gender, I thought about Kode's privilege and how she herself has moments in which she needs to confront the same. I also pushed back in certain places against the idea that, something could not possibly have been that way at that time. When I was writing this book, a historian friend told me she would have dictated her poems because women were not literate. And I said, no, there's too much agency, selfhood, loneliness in the work that I don't think she would have, I don't think that's what would have happened. It doesn't feel intuitively true to me. And so I made the way in which Vishnu Chittan teaches his daughter how to read and write and encourages her as a poet, a very important component of my book. Because The Queen of Jasmine Country is really about what it means to be a writer, what it means to distill one's experiences through fiction. Andal's own poems gave me the structure of my novel. I accessed them through recitations. I would listen over and over again to the Tirupave and the Nachiyar Tirumani. I read Tamil, but slowly, but I do. And so I looked at the original poetry and compared it with various translations that are available. And the translation that I personally relied on the most was Archana Venkatesan's The Secret Garland. There is also a very important academic text by Dr. Dennis Hudson, which completely, once I found it, then I knew that I could create a plot which derived primarily from her poetry. What Dr. Hudson suggested was that when the Bhavinu fails her, Kode undertakes secret tantric rites to the god of lust, Kamadeva. And I felt that this beautifully explained the difference in tone between the playful, girlish Tirupave and the despairing, almost bitter, and very, very visceral and sensual Nachiyar Tirumani. So in using the original poetry, mapping a plot line onto it, thinking deeply every single day about what this woman's life would have been like, what the fabric of her days and her nights were like. These were how I arrived at the book.
The last section is presentation of one's own poetry. And here we'll again start with Sharanya's recording 3. I will be reading very briefly, but first we'll have Sharanya. Come on.
Now I'll share a couple of poems from my most recent collection, The Altar of the Only World. Altar was written over an 8.5-year period, and it primarily began as reflections and emotions in Sita's movements, which tells you something about one of my fundamental preoccupations, which of course eventually led to the writing of The Queen of Jasmine Country. And that is the way in which the stories and the loneliness of mythological or archetypal women can give us a kind of mirror into ourselves, our souls, our societies. While working on this book, I found as many Ramayana tellings as I could, and one of my favorites insists that Sita was Mandodari's daughter. Mandodari, of course, was Ravana's consort, and Mandodari consumed a grail of blood which had been kept for a sacrifice and conceives Sita. And then she releases her baby girl into the sea in a basket like Kanna and Moses. And this basket eventually reaches Mithila. So this poem is called Daughter by Blood and by Way of Sea and Sky. My mother who drank a grail of blood squatted by the seashore and lullabied me into a casket of sandalwood and sweet reeds. Women had done this by dawnlight, since first doubt, first prophecy. She pushed me forth into the tides, touched by no water or salt that had not come from her eyes or mine. Did she know how I would arrive back on the island? Chattel as in a dice game, an apparition, my hair black cirrus. I swooped from the sky, spinning ornaments, spinning invectives and incantations, spinning princess blood from places caressed by claws. Every crown I lost had been worn seated on a lap. Not throne I lost, but warmth of thigh. Ask me what I knew of islands, and I will unring each key in an archipelago of lyric-blocked song, lip-latched colostrum, scent of sudden rain in the tea-terraced mountains. How I drew my breath in as chariot shadow boomed over ocean-sieged land, how my terror made way for memory, memory, memory. In this book, the character of Sita speaks to three other Arundam, who is the loyal one, the fire-forged and blood-born Brahman, and Shubhanaka, the beautiful and mutilated. I would like to read all three. Fire-forged, blood, the wild-haired one. At the core of every blood epic is a woman born of battle lust, the one whose body is weighted dice in a game rigged by fork-tongued crown. She comes through deep magic. We are proof of what happens when a curse is inverted, how from braid of blood and fire sacrifice emerge the true twice-born, who having transcended time move equidistant between worlds. See yourself in my eyes, soul sister. You and I and we are she, who holds the womb songs of vivid stars as she does the darkness between planets, fire gentle as afternoon tide at her feet, blood resplendent at the parting of fire. This is beauty, the mutilated one. You came to me at sunset, so that at first you could not discern cicatrix from skin. The hour of occultation painted this face, orange and black, like a Theon dancer or a tiger. And you asked me, how do you breathe? And I said, the heart. And you had no need then to ask how I listened. But it was you who ached with even a whisper. When we lifted you out of the river, your hair was constellated with fireflies, and from your open mouth gushed brocaded color. Everything inside and around you was still alive, but your eyes were the last to open, and tight in your grip were silver bracelets that had slipped from your wrists to large after those months of parting. The crescent cleaved to your belly like a I was there to watch you then, as I am here to walk with you now, along this avenue of concertina lanterns, in this grove where the leaves dance with epigrams and there is no need for mirrors to prove the always true. Remember yourself beneath the fissured face of the pregnant moon. To love is to lose, to learn the art of afterlife. And when you walk between shadows, your face too becomes dismembered by light. I had only meant to read a couple of times, but then I opened the book and it fell on the one in Draupadi's voice. And then I knew that I should read all three. So that was in Shubhanaka's voice. And finally, this is Nocturne with crossed stars in the voice of Arundhati, the loyal. Hold this moonflower in your mouth. Let it nectar your listenings and silences both. There is a hawk moon arcing towards eternity, its wings tipped with dark matter and stardust. The waves dappled by the timbre of your name in one voice or another. Who named you, beloved? Who brought you here? The heart is a copper drum too heavy to lift, so it rests wherever it is laid on the earth, verdigris with love for forest and water. Listen to its sacred tremors on this evening of incantations. The astronomers did not know what proxy to hold you in place by. Shell or seed, cabochon or coin from a place where the language conveys no unequivocal sense of time. Everything is happening at once and never happens, ever alone. Somewhere there is a boom unbroken that is pointed forever at the constellations, a string that pulses almost imperceptibly. It only feels like an epiphany, as thought vibrates slowly into sound. You must hold very still to unveil the illusion, to know the darkness from the light, to infer the unknown from that which is known, or the shy star from the ones that glitter without giving light. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I apologize again for not being able to be there with you at the Literary Festival, and I apologize for all ambient noises courtesy of my input. Thank you.
So, as we end the session, very briefly, I'll probably read an excerpt of a poem of mine. This is also, because I was presenting Andal, I thought I'd work with poems from my first collection, where I'd drawn from Sangam Poetics, that's a 2 BC to 2 CE Tamil classical poetry, where there are two divisions. Basically, you have war poems, and you have love poems called Aham, which speak of the interior landscape of love and loss. And there are also characters in these poems, each of the man, the woman, the lover, the the stepmother, etc. And I like this idea of narrativizing the poems and creating a story. So this I could accept as feminist, and here it is. The book is called Dialogue and Other Poems, and this is Dialogues 1. She says to her lover, "You who will be enclosed in my flesh, your rhythms mine, our hands like 1,000 comets descending towards pleasure, your sweat becoming my skin. Listen, all this I want and more. Yet, in your passion, do not scar me. Do not split my lip nor stifle speech. Do not force my cervix out of shape nor ram my individuality. I am parched, riven by longing, caked by the long dust of denial, and yet I'll come to you like the first rain, fragrant and trusting." And the second is an excerpt. It's obviously after they've made love, the story progresses. And it's again the woman who says, "My hair streams loose, my limbs become a lake that holds him. Lotus buds, white, pointed, pierce through my body's ink, mirroring the sky's sudden display, and open, pollen spattered, dew drenched, to fall back on their own splendor." The last short poem from this sequence is 5. It is the one of betrayal. The sequence doesn't end in that way, but this one, she says, He said to me, keep faith. So I kept a stubborn faith in him that grew with every obstacle. Swollen, taut, ready, I held this close within myself, feeling his absent presence fill me full. Suddenly, the small spill, for him a little thing, his rapid pulling out of me peels away my very skin. And yes, I end on a note, bringing back, talking about sacredness, but another kind of sacredness, freedom of expression, that we, as citizens of this democratic country, have given ourselves. And now I'm talking, this is from my speculative fiction book called Clone, where it's set in a land where memory is banned. Sex is also banned, but there are false histories circulating, and implicit obedience is expected from all. And the others who they choose are tortured in unimaginable ways. Then a clone she starts getting visions of a different kind of history of her plural histories of her country. And she begins to write in secret. And one day, another character, a poet, comes to her, and as the narrative progresses, and says, I will administer to you an oath. And to my mind, this is every writer's oath or allegiance, every reader's, every citizen's of our democratic country. What she says reads out is the preamble to the Constitution. And I quote the clone: to secure for all justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship, equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of each individual. Thank you.